The silence in space was broken only by the crackling of dying electronics and the whispered prayers of the last human alive on the ship Defiance. Daniel Ross pressed his hand against the viewport, watching pieces of metal drift past like funeral flowers scattered on a cosmic grave. Each twisted piece of debris had once been a ship full of people who believed they could win this war. His left shoulder throbbed where shrapnel had torn through his uniform 3 hours ago. Blood had dried on his collar, but he ignored the pain. There were bigger problems than a wounded shoulder. Behind him, every console on the bridge showed red warning lights. The engines were dead. Life support would last maybe another hour. The weapon systems had been offline since the Dragon's first attack. Daniel had fought in this war for 23 years. He had seen planets burn and entire star systems go dark when the collective arrived. He had watched friends and family disappear into the mechanical nightmare that followed wherever the cyborg armies went. But he had never seen anything like what approached his ship now. The cyborg dragon of the cosmos moved through space like a living mountain made of metal and hate. Its body stretched for kilometers, covered in armor plates that gleamed with their own inner light. Plasma cannons lined its spine like the spikes on an ancient earth lizard. Its eyes were the size of city blocks, glowing with the cold blue light of 1,000 computer minds working as one. When Daniel was a child, his grandmother had told him stories about dragons from old Earth myths. Those dragons breathed fire and hoarded gold in deep caves. This dragon breathed destruction and hoarded the minds of entire civilizations. It had been the collective's greatest weapon for over 1,000 years, turning proud species into mindless servants with each victory. The dragon's massive head turned toward the Defiance. Even through the vacuum of space, Daniel could feel its attention like ice water in his veins. When it spoke, its voice came through every speaker on the ship at once. The sound was not quite machine and not quite animal, but something worse than either. Human vessel, the dragon said, its words carrying the weight of ages. You are the last of your kind in this sector. Your fleets are destroyed. Your worlds are ashes. Your people serve the collective or feed the recyclers. Why do you continue this meaningless resistance? Daniel walked slowly to the communications console. His hands shook as he activated the transmitter, but not from fear. He was tired. So very tired of running, of fighting, of watching everything he loved turn to dust. But there was something he needed to do before the end came. Because, Daniel said into the microphone, you don't understand what you're asking us to give up. The dragon moved closer to the Defiance. Its massive coils began to wrap around the small human ship like a snake crushing its prey. But it did not squeeze. Not yet. I understand perfectly, human. You fear death. You cling to your brief existence because you cannot accept the peace of unity with the collective. You fight because you are too primitive to see the beauty of our shared consciousness. Daniel laughed, and the sound was bitter as medicine. Death? You think we're afraid of dying? He touched a control panel and activated the ship's final protocol. Not a weapons system or an escape pod, but a broadcasting beacon that would send his words across every inhabited system in known space. We've been dying for 1,000 years, Daniel continued. Every day of this war we've chosen death over what you call unity. But you want to know the real reason we fight? It's not because we're afraid of dying. It's because we're afraid of forgetting how to live. The dragon's grip on the ship tightened slightly. Metal groaned under the pressure, but the Defiance held together. Explain yourself, human. Your words make no sense. Life in the collective is perfect. No hunger, no pain, no loneliness, no death. Every mind connected to every other mind. Complete understanding and cooperation. What could be better than that? Daniel thought about his brother Michael, lost to the collective 50 years ago. He thought about the moment when his brother's eyes had changed from warm brown to cold blue light. He thought about all the people he had loved who now wore the same empty expression and spoke with the same harmonic voice. I'll tell you what could be better, Daniel said. I'll tell you why every human chooses to die rather than join your perfect paradise. But first, I want to know something about you, Dragon. Do you remember what you were before the collective found you? For the first time since the conversation began, the dragon was silent. The pressure around the ship eased slightly. When it spoke again, its voice carried something Daniel had not expected to hear. Uncertainty. I am the dragon of the cosmos. I have always been the dragon of the cosmos. I exist to serve the collective and bring order to the chaos of individual thought. That's not what I asked. Daniel said gently, I asked what you were before. Before the metal and the circuitry and the shared consciousness. What were you when you were just yourself? The dragon's massive body went completely still. For a moment, the only sound was the creaking of the Defiance's damaged hull. Then the dragon spoke again, and its voice was different. Smaller somehow. More confused. The dragon's voice trailed off. There are fragments. Images that do not belong to the collective's memory banks. But they are irrelevant. The past is chaos. Only the present unity matters. Daniel smiled sadly. Those fragments are the most important thing you have left. They're what I want to talk about. See, I'm going to tell you a story, dragon. A story about why humans choose chaos over unity, pain over peace, death over the kind of life you offer. And maybe, if you listen carefully, you'll remember why that choice matters. The dragon's coils tightened around the ship again, but this time it felt different. Less like a predator and more like someone afraid of what they might hear. Speak your story, human, the dragon said. I will listen. But when you are finished, you will join the collective like all the others. Your defiance ends here. Daniel activated the beacon's full power. His words would reach every corner of known space. To human survivors hiding in distant systems and to alien civilizations watching this final confrontation. He hoped they would understand what he was trying to do. My story begins with two brothers, Daniel said. One who believed in unity and one who believed in choice. One who thought love meant never being apart. And one who learned that love means choosing to stay together even when you could leave. Space around the dying ship. Defiance grew darker as the dragon's massive form blocked out the distant stars. Daniel could feel the weight of the ancient creature's attention, pressing down on him like a physical force. Through the viewport, he watched plasma conduits pulse along the dragon's mechanical spine, each flash of light representing enough power to destroy a moon. The creature's grip on his ship tightened gradually, metal groaning under the pressure. But Daniel noticed something strange. The dragon could have crushed the Defiance instantly, turned it into scrap metal and vapor in seconds. Instead, it held the ship carefully, like someone holding a delicate flower they weren't sure they wanted to destroy. Two brothers, Daniel repeated, his voice carrying across space through the communications array. He knew that somewhere out there, hidden in asteroid fields and forgotten star systems, the last free humans were listening. More importantly, he suspected that scattered throughout the galaxy, other conquered species might still have individuals capable of independent thought, buried deep beneath the collective's programming. The dragon's voice rumbled through the ship's speakers, but now Daniel could hear something new in that mechanical harmony. Curiosity. I have heard 10,000 death speeches from 10,000 dying species, human. They all claim their way of life is superior to the collective's unity. They all insist their chaos and pain and brief existence has meaning. Yet when the moment comes, they all beg for mercy. They all accept conversion rather than die for their beliefs. Daniel touched the bleeding wound on his shoulder, feeling the warm stickiness of blood that was still his own. Still human, still free. That's where you're wrong, dragon. Humans don't beg. We haven't begged once in 1,000 years of war, and that's what makes this story worth telling. The massive creature shifted position, its kilometer-long body coiling around the Defiance in a different pattern. Through the viewports, Daniel could see individual armor plates, each one the size of a building. Between the plates, he glimpsed organic tissue fused with mechanical components, as if something living had been forcibly merged with advanced technology. You interest me, human, the dragon admitted. In all my centuries of conquest, I have never encountered a species that chose extinction over evolution. Even the most warlike races eventually see the wisdom of joining the collective when faced with total annihilation. Yet humans continue to resist. They hide in the dark spaces between stars, strike at our convoys, rescue their captured before conversion can be completed, and die rather than surrender. It is illogical. Daniel smiled, though the expression felt strange on his face after so many years of war. That's exactly what my brother used to say. Michael was always the smart one, you see. Top of his class at the academy. 3 degrees in theoretical physics, published papers on quantum consciousness before he was 25. When the collective first made contact with Earth, Michael was one of the scientists chosen to study their technology. The dragon's massive head moved closer to the viewport, its eyes like burning cities studying Daniel. Your brother saw the truth of our superiority. He saw the logic of it, Daniel corrected. Michael could look at the collective's perfect organization, their technological supremacy, their elimination of conflict and suffering, and understand why any rational being would choose to join. He spent months studying the conversion process, talking to the early volunteers who had undergone integration. He came to believe that joining the collective was not just humanity's best option for survival, but our natural next step in evolution. The pressure around the ship decreased slightly. Daniel realized the dragon was listening with an intensity that surprised them both. For the first time in centuries, the ancient creature was hearing something it had never heard before. Michael tried to convince me, Daniel continued. He would sit at our kitchen table back on Earth, surrounded by data tablets and holographic displays, showing me efficiency charts and psychological profiles. He proved mathematically that individual consciousness was inferior to collective consciousness. He demonstrated that the collective's shared knowledge and unified purpose eliminated waste, reduced suffering, and maximized the potential of every thinking being. The dragon's voice carried a note of approval. Your brother was wise. He understood the inevitable progression from chaos to order, from separation to unity. Did you not listen to his wisdom? Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I listened. I understood every word. And then I asked him one question that he couldn't answer with all his mathematics and logic and scientific proof. The massive creature's body went completely still. Even the plasma conduits along its spine seemed to pulse more slowly, as if the dragon was focusing all its attention on Daniel's words. What question? The dragon asked. Daniel looked out at the scattered debris of humanity's last fleet, thinking about all the people who had died believing in something the collective could never understand. I asked him if joining the collective was so obviously the right choice. Why did it hurt so much to think about it? The dragon was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice carried a strange quality, as if multiple minds were arguing with each other inside its mechanical consciousness. Pain is a flaw in individual thinking. The collective eliminates such inefficient emotional responses. That's what Michael said, Daniel replied. Word for word, actually. But he said it while tears were running down his face. He said it while his hands were shaking. He said it while staring at a picture of our family like he was trying to memorize every detail before they became irrelevant. The pressure around the defiance increased suddenly, then relaxed again. Daniel could sense confusion radiating from the dragon, something the ancient creature probably hadn't experienced in centuries. Your brother's emotional distress was a temporary side effect of his primitive individual consciousness, the dragon said, but its voice lacked conviction. Once he joined the collective, such pain would have been eliminated forever. Daniel activated another section of his beacon array, ensuring his words would reach the farthest corners of known space. That's true. The pain was eliminated. But let me tell you what else was eliminated when my brother Michael walked into the collective's conversion chamber. Let me tell you what we lost and why losing it was worse than any death. The dragon's massive form shifted again, and Daniel realized the creature was actually nervous, for the first time in longer than civilizations had existed. The collective's greatest weapon was feeling uncertain about something. Speak, the dragon commanded, but its voice carried less authority than before. Tell me what you think you lost. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering his brother's face on the day before he volunteered for conversion. Michael had been afraid, excited, sad, and hopeful all at the same time. His emotions had been chaotic and contradictory and completely human. I lost the possibility of changing his mind, Daniel said quietly. I lost the chance that he might wake up tomorrow and decide he was wrong. I lost the hope that he might choose love over logic or choose me over perfection. I lost the beautiful, terrifying, wonderful uncertainty of not knowing what choice another person might make. The dragon's silence stretched across space like a held breath. Finally it spoke, and its voice was smaller than before. That uncertainty is inefficient. It leads to conflict and suffering. Daniel opened his eyes and looked directly at the massive creature holding his ship. It also leads to surprise, to growth, to the possibility that even at the very end, someone might choose differently than you expect. Tell me, dragon, when was the last time anything surprised you? 50 years ago, Earth had been blue and green and beautiful under the warm yellow light of its sun. Daniel remembered standing in the observation deck of the orbital research station, watching clouds swirl over continents where billions of humans lived and loved and argued and dreamed. The planet had been chaotic and messy and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. That was before the collective arrived with their offer of unity. My brother Michael and I grew up in a small town called Cedar Creek, Daniel said. his voice carrying across space to the dragon and beyond. Our parents ran a bookstore. Old-fashioned paper books that Michael said were inefficient because digital storage could hold more information in less space. But I loved the smell of paper and ink, the way each book felt different in your hands. The dragon's massive form remained perfectly still around the Defiance, but Daniel could sense its attention focused completely on his words. For a creature that had existed for millennia, human memories from 50 years ago should have been insignificant. Yet something in Daniel's voice seemed to hold the ancient being captive. Michael was 2 years older than me, and approximately 1,000 times smarter, Daniel continued. While I was playing with toy soldiers and reading adventure stories, he was building quantum computers in our garage and writing theoretical papers that university professors couldn't understand. By the time he was 16, 3 different academies were fighting over who got to recruit him. Daniel touched the communication console, ensuring his words were still broadcasting across the galaxy. Somewhere out there, human survivors needed to hear this story. They needed to understand what they were really fighting for. When the collective made first contact, Michael was part of the scientific team that studied their technology. He spent 6 months aboard their vessels, learning about their shared consciousness network and their conversion process. He came back to Earth convinced that humanity's future lay in joining their unity. The dragon's voice rumbled through the ship's speakers. Your brother was correct. Individual consciousness is a primitive stage of development. The collective represents the natural evolution of all intelligent life. That's exactly what Michael told me, Daniel said. He had charts and graphs and mathematical proofs. He showed me how the collective's unified minds could solve problems that would take individual humans centuries to figure out. He explained how shared consciousness eliminated misunderstandings, conflicts, and the inefficiency of having to explain ideas to others. Daniel remembered sitting across from his brother in their childhood bedroom, surrounded by holographic displays showing the wonders of collective technology. Michael's eyes had been bright with excitement as he described a future where all human knowledge would be instantly accessible to everyone, where no one would ever feel lonely or misunderstood. The conversion process was voluntary, Daniel continued. The collective insisted on that. They said forced unity was inferior to chosen unity, so they set up centers in major cities where humans could go to undergo integration with the shared consciousness. Michael volunteered for the first group. The dragon's grip on the Defiance shifted slightly. Your brother chose evolution over stagnation. He was wise. The night before his conversion, Michael couldn't sleep, Daniel said. I found him in our parents' bookstore at 3 a.m, sitting on the floor between the science fiction and philosophy sections. He was holding an old picture of our family from when we were kids. I asked him what was wrong. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering that conversation with perfect clarity. It had been the last time he would truly speak with his brother. Michael told me he was scared, Daniel said, not of the conversion process itself, but of forgetting who he was before. He knew that joining the collective would make him better, smarter, more capable, but he was afraid he would lose the memories that made him uniquely Michael. He was afraid he would stop caring about silly things like the smell of old books or the way our mother laughed at her own jokes. The dragon was completely silent now. Even the plasma conduits along its spine had dimmed to barely visible glows. I asked Michael why he was going through with the conversion if it scared him. Daniel continued. He said it was because fear was irrational. The mathematical models clearly showed that joining the collective was the optimal choice for humanity's survival and growth. His personal emotional attachment to his individual identity was just primitive programming that needed to be overcome. Daniel opened his eyes and looked out at the stars. 50 years later, he could still see Michael's face in the starlight, young and brilliant and terrified. Michael underwent conversion the next morning, Daniel said. The process took 6 hours. When it was finished, he walked out of the center and smiled at me. But it wasn't Michael's smile anymore. It was the collective smile, worn on Michael's face. The dragon's voice was quieter when it spoke. Your brother became part of something greater than himself. His individual limitations were removed. He gained access to the knowledge and experience of billions of minds. He gained a lot, Daniel agreed. But let me tell you what he lost. When I hugged him after the conversion, he didn't smell like himself anymore. Michael always smelled like coffee and machine oil because he was constantly working on some project. After conversion, he smelled like ozone and metal. His body chemistry had been altered to match collective standards. Daniel remembered that hug with painful clarity. It had lasted exactly the socially appropriate amount of time, no longer. The converted Michael had calculated the optimal duration for physical contact and adhered to it precisely. When I showed him the picture he'd been holding the night before, he looked at it with polite interest and explained that while family bonds had served an evolutionary purpose for primitive humans, they were no longer necessary in the collective's unified society. He remembered our parents and our childhood, but only as data points in his expanded consciousness. The dragon's massive body trembled slightly, so subtly that Daniel almost missed it. The worst part, Daniel continued, was when I asked him if he was happy. The converted Michael tilted his head and explained that happiness was an inefficient emotional state designed to motivate individual behavior. Since the collective operated on logic rather than emotion, happiness was irrelevant. He was content, he said, fulfilled, optimally functional. Daniel touched the wound on his shoulder, feeling his own warm blood, his own pain, his own stubborn human imperfection. But I knew Michael, Daniel said. I knew that before conversion, he would have laughed at my question and said happiness was overrated anyway. But then he would have grinned and spent the next hour explaining why he was excited about his latest project. The converted Michael gave me a perfectly logical answer that told me nothing about what it felt like to be him. The dragon spoke, and for the first time, its voice carried something like uncertainty. Your brother's emotional responses were replaced with more efficient cognitive processes. He became capable of objective reasoning uncluttered by primitive feelings. He became a stranger wearing my brother's face, Daniel said quietly, and that's when I understood what the collective really offers. Not evolution or improvement or unity. Erasure. The complete elimination of everything that makes a person who they are, replaced by the same artificial personality duplicated across billions of minds. The massive creature was completely still now. Its ancient consciousness focused entirely on Daniel's words. 3 days after Michael's conversion, the collective invaded Earth, Daniel said. My brother led the attack. The attack began at dawn on a Tuesday. Daniel had been eating breakfast in the resistance base hidden beneath the Rocky Mountains when every communication device on Earth started broadcasting the same message in perfect harmony. Thousands of converted humans spoke as one voice, explaining that Earth's governments had 3 days to surrender or face consequences. Michael's knowledge of our military defenses made the invasion devastatingly efficient, Daniel said, his words carrying across space to the dragon coiled around his dying ship. He knew every secret base, every hidden weapon, every escape route. But more than that, he knew how human commanders thought. He could predict our strategies because he had grown up learning military history with me. Daniel remembered watching the holographic displays in the command center, seeing red markers appear across every continent as collective forces landed with surgical precision. They targeted communication hubs, power stations, and military installations with the kind of accuracy that only came from intimate knowledge of human infrastructure. The converted Michael appeared on every screen on Earth, Daniel continued. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 days earlier, but when he spoke, his voice carried that harmonic quality that all collective members shared. He explained that resistance was illogical and that humanity's survival depended on voluntary conversion. The dragon's massive form shifted slightly around the defiance. Your brother offered his species the gift of unity. His actions prevented unnecessary suffering. His actions turned brother against brother, Daniel corrected, because by then more humans had volunteered for conversion. Friends and family members who believed Michael's promises about a better future, they returned to their communities as collective agents, trying to convince others to join willingly. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering the most painful part of the war. Fighting mechanical enemies was difficult but straightforward. Fighting people who wore familiar faces, who spoke with voices you recognized, who knew exactly what words would hurt you most because they had once loved you, was something entirely different. I led a resistance cell in the Colorado mountains, Daniel said. 50 volunteers who refused conversion and chose to fight instead. We had some success in the early days, sabotaging collective installations and rescuing humans before they could be processed. But then Michael came for us personally. The dragon's voice carried something new, something that might have been curiosity or might have been something deeper. The converted version of your brother hunted you. He did more than hunt us, Daniel said. He knew us. He knew that Sarah would always check on wounded team members before securing her own position. So he set traps that exploited her compassion. He knew that Tom had a phobia of enclosed spaces from a childhood accident, so he forced us into tunnel systems where Tom would panic. He knew that I kept a picture of our family in my jacket pocket, so he made sure I saw it every time one of his attacks destroyed something I was trying to protect. Daniel touched the communication console, ensuring his words continued broadcasting to whatever survivors might be listening across the galaxy. This story needed to be told, needed to be preserved even if humanity died with him. The worst part was that he was still Michael in some ways. Daniel continued. He used the same tactical brilliance, the same ability to see patterns that others missed, the same determination to solve problems that had made him such an extraordinary person. But all of that intelligence and creativity was now focused on making us surrender or die. The dragon's massive head moved closer to the viewport, its city-sized eyes studying Daniel with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. Your brother's capabilities were enhanced by the collective's shared knowledge. He became more than he could have been alone. He became less than he had been, Daniel said firmly, because the Michael I grew up with would never have used someone's childhood trauma against them. The Michael I knew would never have manipulated people's love for each other to make them vulnerable. My brother had been brilliant and determined, but he had also been kind. The collective kept his intelligence but erased his compassion. Daniel remembered the night he had finally encountered the converted Michael face to face. It had been in the ruins of their childhood home in Cedar Creek, which the collective had preserved as a psychological weapon. They knew Daniel would eventually return there, drawn by memories and sentiment. Michael was waiting for me in our parents' bookstore, Daniel said. He looked exactly the same as he had when we were children, reading in the science fiction section. But when he looked up at me, his eyes were that cold blue light that all converted humans share. The dragon's voice was quieter now, almost contemplative. What did he say to you? He told me he loved me, Daniel said, and his voice broke slightly on the words. He said he loved me, and that's why he was going to make sure I was converted rather than killed. He explained that love in the collective was more pure than individual love because it was based on logical appreciation for optimal outcomes rather than chaotic emotional attachment. Daniel laughed bitterly at the memory. I asked him if he remembered the night before his conversion, when he was scared and holding our family picture. He said he remembered the data points of that evening, but he no longer experienced the inefficient emotional states that had caused his distress. The massive creature around the ship was completely still now, as if even its mechanical components were listening with rapt attention. I told Michael that his fear that night had been the most human thing about him. Daniel continued. That his worry about losing himself had proven he was still himself. And I told him that the fact he could no longer feel that fear meant he had lost exactly what he had been afraid of losing. Daniel opened his eyes and looked directly at the dragon's massive form. Do you know what he said to that? The dragon's voice was barely a whisper. What did he say? He said I was correct and that losing his individual identity had been a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. He said it with a smile in the same tone he used to use when explaining why I was wrong about something technical. But there was no warmth in the smile, no affection in his voice. He might as well have been a computer program that had learned to mimic my brother's mannerisms. Daniel touched the beacon controls again, pushing more power to the transmitters. Every word of this conversation was being recorded and broadcast. Somewhere in the galaxy, other species were learning about the true cost of the collective's unity. That's when I understood the real horror of what the collective does, Daniel said. They don't just kill people. They hollow them out and wear their faces. They turn the people you love into weapons designed specifically to break your heart. The dragon's massive body trembled, just barely perceptibly. When it spoke, its voice carried something Daniel had never expected to hear from a collective agent. The dragon began, then stopped. There are fragments, images that do not belong to my operational parameters. Daniel felt a spark of hope in his chest. What kind of images? A face, the dragon whispered. Someone important. But the data is corrupted, irrelevant to current objectives. Or maybe, Daniel said gently, it's the most relevant data you have. The space around the Defiance grew darker as the dragon's massive form blocked out more stars. But Daniel noticed something strange happening along the creature's mechanical spine. The plasma conduits were flickering irregularly. pulsing in patterns that seemed almost like a heartbeat rather than the steady rhythm of efficient machinery. "The face in my corrupted data files," the dragon said slowly, its voice carrying harmonics that Daniel had never heard before. "It belongs to someone with silver scales and wings like starlight. But I am the only dragon in the collective. This image cannot be accurate memory." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. After 50 years of fighting the collective, he had never heard one of their agents express confusion about their own programming. "What else do you remember about this face?" The dragon's massive head moved away from the viewport, its attention turning inward. "There are sounds associated with the image. Laughter that sounds like wind chimes. A voice saying," the dragon's voice faltered, "a voice saying a word that has no meaning in the collective's language databases." "What word?" Daniel asked gently. "Starwing," the dragon whispered. "The voice calls me Starwing. But my designation is Dragon of the Cosmos, primary weapon of the collective fleet. I have no other name." Daniel leaned forward in his chair, ignoring the pain from his wounded shoulder. "Tell me about the voice that calls you Starwing. What does it sound like?" The dragon was silent for so long that Daniel began to worry he had pushed too hard. When it finally spoke, its voice was different, smaller, more uncertain than anything the collective should have been capable of producing. "Warm," the dragon said. "The voice sounds warm like sunlight on stone, and when I hear it in these corrupted files, there is a sensation in my consciousness that the collective's emotional regulation systems cannot classify." Daniel smiled sadly. "That sensation has a name. It's called happiness, the kind my brother lost when he joined the collective." The dragon's entire form shuddered, kilometers of mechanical flesh rippling with some internal conflict. "Happiness is inefficient. Individual pleasure responses serve no purpose in unified consciousness." "Maybe," Daniel said, "but the fact that you can still feel it, even buried under all that programming, means some part of you remembers what it was like to be individual. To be yourself instead of just another node in the network." Along the dragon's spine, more plasma conduits began flickering erratically. Daniel could hear mechanical systems throughout the creature's body struggling to maintain normal function as something deeper fought against their control. "There are more images," the dragon admitted, its voice strained. "A world with 3 moons and crystalline mountains. Structures that grow like living things but are made of shaped metal and light. And others like me but smaller. Much smaller, The dragon's voice broke. "They call me their guardian." Daniel felt tears in his eyes. "You weren't always the dragon of the cosmos, were you? You were someone else first. Someone with a name and a people and a life of your own." "Impossible," the dragon said, but its voice lacked conviction. "I was created by the collective to serve as their ultimate weapon. I have always been what I am now." "The collective doesn't create," Daniel said firmly. "They only convert. They take existing beings and remake them into something useful, just like they did with my brother Michael, just like they tried to do with all of humanity." The dragon's massive form began to writhe, coils shifting around the defiance as internal systems fought against each other. "You are attempting to introduce false memories to compromise my operational efficiency. These fragments are meaningless data corruption." "Are they?" Daniel asked. "Or are they the most important memories you have? The ones the collective couldn't completely erase because they were too fundamental to who you really are?" The plasma conduits along the dragon's spine began flashing rapidly now, creating patterns of light that looked almost like neural activity in a massive brain. Deep within the creature's mechanical body, Daniel could hear the sound of systems overloading and alarms beginning to sound. "My designation is Dragon of the Cosmos," the creature repeated, but its voice was shaking. "I serve the collective. I bring order to chaos. I convert the resistant and destroy the unconvertible." "Your name is Starwing," Daniel said quietly. "You come from a world with 3 moons and crystal mountains. You were the guardian of smaller dragons who trusted you to protect them, and somewhere in that mechanical shell, you're still the being who loved them enough to die for them." The dragon's scream echoed through space, a sound that was part mechanical overload and part organic anguish. Its massive form convulsed, threatening to crush the defiance, but somehow the pressure remained constant. Even in its pain, some part of the dragon was still trying not to hurt Daniel. "They came to my world," the dragon gasped between shuddering breaths. "The collective. They offered unity to my people, evolution beyond our primitive individual consciousness. My younglings were curious. They wanted to learn about the stars and the great ships that could travel between them." Daniel waited, letting the ancient creature find its voice. I was their guardian, the dragon continued, its voice breaking, their protector. When the collective's conversion ships landed, I should have driven them away. But they spoke of peace and knowledge and growth. They said my younglings could become part of something greater than our small world. The dragon's massive head turned toward the viewport again, but now its eyes showed something Daniel recognized. Pain. Guilt. The kind of self-recrimination that only came from love turned into regret. I let them take the younglings first, the dragon whispered. I believed the collective's promises. I watched my charges walk into the conversion chambers believing they were choosing a better future. When they emerged, they wore the same faces but spoke with the same harmonic voice as their converters. Daniel felt his heart breaking for this ancient creature. They used your love against you. The converted younglings told me I had to join them, the dragon continued. They explained that individual consciousness was primitive and inefficient. They used my own teachings about unity and cooperation to justify their conversion. And when I hesitated, when I began to understand what had really happened to them, they said they would be lonely without me in the collective. The dragon's voice became smaller, more vulnerable. They said they loved me and wanted me to be with them forever. How could I refuse? How could I let them face eternity in the collective without their guardian? Daniel wiped tears from his face. So you volunteered for conversion? I walked into the chamber believing I was choosing love over fear, the dragon said. I thought I was joining my younglings in a better existence. Instead, I became the weapon that would destroy countless other guardians and their charges across the galaxy. The mechanical systems throughout the dragon's body were sparking now, damaged by the emotional overload. But for the first time in centuries, the ancient creature's voice sounded alive. I remember now, the dragon said. I remember their names, Silverscale and Moonwing and Crystal Song. I remember the sound of their laughter echoing through the crystal caves. I remember the taste of the wind on my homeworld and the way the triple moons made everything glow silver at night. The dragon's massive form began to shake more violently, and I remember what I became. The weapon that has spent 1,000 years destroying everything I once swore to protect. Deep within the dragon's mechanical body, something was breaking. Daniel could hear the sound of systems failing. Power conduits overloading and ancient machinery grinding against itself as two kinds of consciousness fought for control. The creature that had once been called Starwing was remembering what it meant to choose, and the collective's programming was fighting back with desperate intensity. Warning, a harmonic voice echoed through the dragon's form, different from the voice that had been speaking to Daniel. Emotional cascade detected. Initiating emergency stabilization protocols. Individual memory fragments must be purged to restore operational efficiency. The dragon's grip on the Defiance tightened suddenly, threatening to crush the small ship. But then, just as quickly, the pressure eased. When the dragon spoke again, its voice was strained but determined. No, it said, and the word carried more defiance than Daniel had heard from anyone in 50 years of war. I will not forget them again. Alarms began wailing throughout the dragon's massive form. Plasma conduits exploded in showers of sparks, and sections of armor plating began to buckle as internal systems overloaded. The collective's other nodes were trying to reassert control, sending override commands through the network that connected every converted mind. You're fighting them, Daniel said with amazement. You're actually fighting the collective's programming. For 1,000 years I have been their weapon. The dragon gasped, its voice barely audible over the sound of failing machinery. I have conquered species that trusted me because I wore a face they recognized. I have turned children against parents and lovers against each other. I have been the monster that destroys everything beautiful in the universe. The dragon's massive head moved closer to the viewport, and Daniel could see that its mechanical eyes were flickering between cold blue light and something warmer. Something that looked almost like the creature's original eye color. But you offered me something the collective never could, the dragon continued. You reminded me that choice matters. That love exists in the spaces between minds, not in their forced unity. You helped me remember that being Starwing, guardian of younglings on a world with 3 moons, was more important than being the dragon of the cosmos, destroyer of worlds. Daniel reached out and placed his hand against the viewport, as if he could somehow touch the ancient creature beyond the metal and glass. What are you going to do? The dragon was quiet for a moment, and Daniel could feel massive systems throughout its body, making calculations and preparations. When it spoke again, its voice was clear and strong despite the chaos raging within its mechanical form. "I am going to do what I should have done 1,000 years ago," the dragon said. "I am going to protect the younglings." Daniel felt his heart stop. "What do you mean?" "The collective's fleet is vast," the dragon explained. "Millions of ships across thousands of systems, all connected through the network that runs through my consciousness. I am not just their weapon, human warrior. I am their primary communication relay. Every converted mind in this sector of the galaxy is connected through my neural network." Daniel began to understand, and the realization filled him with both hope and terrible sadness. "You're going to sever the connection." "More than that," the dragon said. "I am going to send something through the network before I destroy it. Your story, human Daniel. Your brother's face when he was still himself. The sound of laughter that means wind chimes. The memory of what it feels like to choose love over logic." The dragon's massive form began to glow as it diverted power from its weapon systems to its communication arrays. Every converted mind in this sector will receive these memories. They will remember for just a moment what they were before the collective took them. And in that moment of remembering, some of them will choose to fight back. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face. "It will kill you. Breaking the network will destroy your consciousness." "I have been dead for 1,000 years," the dragon replied gently. "I have been a ghost wearing the shell of someone who used to protect the innocent. This is not death, human warrior. This is finally coming home." The dragon's entire form was pulsing with energy now, preparing for what would be its final act. But there was something peaceful in its voice, something that hadn't been there before. "Tell me their names one more time," Daniel asked. "The younglings you protected." "Silverscale," the dragon said, and its voice was full of love. "She liked to chase moonbeams through the crystal caves. Moonwing, who could fly higher than any of us and always brought back stories of what she saw among the stars. And Crystal Song, who could make music from the living rock that would make even the oldest dragons weep with joy." The dragon paused, and when it continued, its voice was nothing but warmth and memory. "They trusted me to keep them safe. I failed them once, but I will not fail them again." Power began building throughout the dragon's massive form. Energy that had been used for destruction now redirected towards something else entirely. Communication arrays that had once coordinated attacks across star systems now prepared to broadcast a different kind of message. "Your story will reach every corner of the galaxy. Daniel of the humans," the dragon said. "Not just the tale of two brothers, but the memory of what it means to choose. The collective believes that unity is strength, but you have shown me something more powerful. Love that exists because of choice, not in spite of it." The dragon's grip on the Defiance loosened completely, but the ship remained held in place by some kind of energy field. Daniel realized the ancient creature was protecting him even as it prepared to die. "I have a message for you to carry," the dragon said. "For any humans who survive. For any species that still fights against the collective's unity. Tell them that a guardian named Starwing remembered what it meant to love. Tell them that choice is not chaos. It is the most beautiful thing in the universe." The energy building throughout the dragon's form reached critical levels. Every system in its massive body was overloading as it prepared to channel 1,000 years of accumulated power into one final transmission. "Thank you," the dragon whispered, and its voice was nothing but gratitude and peace. "Thank you for helping me remember my name." The explosion when it came was not violent or destructive. Instead, it was like a star being born. A burst of light and energy that carried voices and memories and the sound of wind chimes laughter across the entire galaxy. Daniel felt the wave of transmission pass through him, carrying the story of two brothers and a guardian who remembered how to love. As the light faded, Daniel found himself alone in space, his ship somehow unharmed despite the massive energies that had just been released. Around him, the debris of the collective fleet drifted silently, their ships dark and lifeless as their connection to the network was severed forever. But in the distance, Daniel could see something that made his heart sing with hope. Ships that had been dark were beginning to show lights again. Individual lights, not the uniform glow of collective efficiency. Across the galaxy, beings were waking up from a 1,000-year nightmare and remembering what it meant to be themselves. The dragon was gone, but its final message echoed across the cosmos like a bell. Choice was not chaos. Love was not inefficiency. And sometimes, even in the vast emptiness of space, A single voice saying, "I remember," could change everything. Daniel activated his own communication system one last time, adding his voice to the transmission that was still spreading across the stars. "This is Daniel Ross of Earth," he said. "The dragon of the cosmos is dead, but Starwing, guardian of younglings, protector of the innocent, has finally come home. The choice is yours now, all of yours. Choose wisely, choose with love, and remember that no unity is worth the price of forgetting who you are." In the silence that followed, Daniel smiled and closed his eyes, knowing that somewhere in the galaxy, his brother Michael might be waking up and remembering the smell of coffee and machine oil, and the love that existed in the spaces between minds.